The Baltimore Ravens disappoint at the 2024 NFL trade deadline. We talk about the moves they made, but more importantly, the moves they didn't. All that and more coming up next here on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens either your first, or if you already watched today's episode, your second listen of the day here, or free and available for you all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, where you can follow along and subscribe as well. 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage, just like these instant reaction episodes go live after every single Ravens game and every single Ravens piece of big news. And it is big news that the Ravens disappointed at the trade deadline today. Today's instant reaction episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Man, I'm sitting here. If you're watching with us live, it is about 4:20 p.m. Eastern time, right after deadline day. So we're about 20 minutes past the deadline. And the Ravens did not acquire a pass rusher. They did not. Their move was Tre'Davious White today. The cornerback from the Los Angeles Rams comes over to the Ravens. But that's not what the need was. The secondary hasn't been wonderful this season, but I think everybody who's watched this Ravens defense understands the fall off that this pass rush has had, and the fact that getting a pass rusher was an absolute must. And I waited for a little bit to actually hit the go live button here, because usually there are a deal or two that sometimes trickle in once you actually hit that 4 o'clock window. And, actually, if it hits, if there's something that hits while we're recording this, I'll stop this entire stream. We'll set it up and we'll go again and we'll celebrate a pass rusher. But, 20 minutes in, it does not, or after the fact, I guess, it does not look like that is happening. Ravens final trade haul looks like Diontae Johnson, Trey White, a 6th round pick and a 7th round pick for a 5th round pick and a 7th round pick. Now, I had come on here. If you've been listening to me on Locked On Ravens, I had come on here and I had said, look, if the Ravens don't make another move or don't acquire a pass rusher, I would label the trade deadline as a disappointment. And here we are. And I'm not going to back down on that word. This deadline was a disappointment for the Ravens. The Ravens acquired 2 players, but they leave the deadline with the exact same amount of picks that they started with, 11. And you talk about a franchise that, look, if this is the year, well, this is a historic level offense that we're watching right now. This is a historic Lamar Jackson, a historic Derrick Henry. And you can identify almost 0 weaknesses. There are some, obviously, but almost 0 real weaknesses on that offense. Offensive line, you could have stood an upgrade there, but that's always tough. But regardless, you get your depth wide receiver, fine. Okay, that's great. That was a need, but it wasn't at the top of your list. And yes, you got Diontae Johnson for free, and you got Trey White for essentially free as well. I mean, it's just pick swaps. In a vacuum, I liked the Diontae Johnson trade. I really don't like the Trey White trade whatsoever. We'll talk about that coming up, even though it was essentially a 7-round pick for a 7-round pick. But we'll talk about that. But this whole process, looking at names, looking at potential ads for the Ravens, you look at this pass rushing performance over the last month, and I want to read out a stat here. The Lions obviously lost Aiden Hutchinson for the year. Brutal injury for them. And you have a Ravens team that, when you're looking at worst pass rush win rate since the Lions lost Aiden Hutchinson, so obviously that was a couple weeks ago, but so over the last couple of weeks here, worst pass rush win rate in the league. Baltimore Ravens, worst in the league, 23%. 23% pass rush win rate. Now, there are a lot of reasons that we can kind of walk through as opposed to why the Ravens didn't go after a pass rusher. Apparently, they were looking at options, but at this point, you have 11 picks. It's okay to overpay, especially when you have a bunch of later round picks that you can rely on. I get that Lamar Jackson's on a big contract. I get that you have a bunch of other things you got to look at down the line, and draft picks become super valuable for a team that has a big quarterback contract. But 11? When we get to the draft, I'm sure Eric DeCosta will be wheeling and dealing, trying to move up, move down, do whatever he does. But that's in April. We're in November, and this Ravens team has a legitimate shot to win the Super Bowl. And you can't give up what's the difference between a 7th and a 6th, a 6th and a 5th, a 5th and a 4th? Once you start moving up that ladder, of course, it gets more difficult, but there were options there. Now, the way that this can be saved, and maybe a team will have to save the Ravens, is if there's a guy that's released that Baltimore goes out there and gets. There were a couple of defensive linemen released, such as Jordan Phillips from Dallas, who has not been good this season. Quentin Jefferson, I think, got released from Buffalo, or maybe it was, I can't remember where Quentin Jefferson was playing. Oh, no, it was Cleveland. It was Cleveland. He was playing for Cleveland. He got released by Cleveland. He was not doing all that well this season either. You look at a guy like Calais, who's 38 years old. Would that have been the big splash move, right? Would that have been the big needle mover, the Max Crosby, the Myles Garrett? Of course not. I don't think I was selling it that way. I don't think anybody else was feeling that way. But he was having a great season. You can manage those snaps a little bit. It's better than nothing, right? It's better than nothing. And as I peruse here through Twitter, trying to get other updates on the whole situation, you look across the rest of the league and you see the Jets, even though the Jets are the Jets, they got Devontae Adams. And you got the Chiefs, who got DeAndre Hopkins. That's your biggest threat in the AFC is the Chiefs. They get DeAndre Hopkins and Josh Uche. You know, Buffalo gets Amari Cooper. They upgraded there, and that was a decently significant upgrade for them. And so for the Ravens, yes, you did get Deontay Johnson, and you did get Trey White. Those were moves. But when you talk about the tier list, and we talked about this on the show, you talk about the tier list of the actual needs this team had. Pass rusher was by far and away the number one. You have David Ojabo, who has been a healthy scratch over the last 2 weeks. He has not played. Doesn't seem like Baltimore really believes in him anymore. And what type of a sign is that if your second round pick from a couple of years ago can't even crack your healthy rotation, and your healthy rotation, you know, it's not necessarily producing. Kyle Van Noy was awesome to start the season. Kyle Van Noy was incredible, but you can't just be relying on him. Odafe Owe has been very up and down this season, and in some spots he hasn't shown up the way that the Ravens have needed him to. Nnamdi Madubuike is getting double teamed on a lot of these plays, but one-on-ones we haven't seen the same juice. And again, teams are trying to take Nnamdi out of the game plan and not have him wreck like we saw him do last season. But when teams are doubling one of your best interior pass rushers, if you're one-on-one with a guy on the outside, you have to win those matchups. You have to do it. Kyle Van Noy should be winning those more consistently. And Kyle Van Noy, I want to give credit to him. He does win matchups, but sometimes with the way this works, the quarterback is either getting the ball out too quickly or there's just something else that goes on. But Ojabo is out, right? He's I don't know what's going on. They're not playing him, but he's Isaac. You're not going to rely on him this season. Yannick Ngakoue had a couple moments this season, but you know, that is what it is. And I see, Emil, this is a good point. You have to look at the asking prices too. Azeez Ojulari apparently had a ridiculous asking price. Preston Smith is old. Though I would have loved Azeez, but again, not at that price. But, you know, for a Calais Campbell, for a Jadeveon Clowney, Arden Key over in Tennessee, it just felt like something could have happened there. And when you're looking at a potential Super Bowl roster, a potential Super Bowl offense, I'm fine overpaying around for a guy. I get it. This organization loves draft picks, and historically, they've done a decently good job, right? More than decently good job at drafting guys, right? It's true. And especially as I mentioned, in this era, in the Lamar Jackson contract era, you do need more draft picks. You need to hit on more of those selections. And that is a 100% true thing. So if the Dolphins can go and release Calais Campbell, I would assume, would be interested in reuniting with the Ravens. That could be interesting. But does Miami feel like they have a shot? I don't think they do. I think they're done. But if Miami's not willing to sacrifice around and, give the Ravens Calais, no team is going to sacrifice that. It just feels like for Baltimore, I'm not saying this happened, but if the difference in Calais Campbell was a 6th to a 7th or a 5th to a 6th, I would have made that move. And so now what your reality is for the Ravens is you're relying. It's a risk. I'm not saying they can't do it, right? I'm not saying that they can't turn it around. They can't do this. They can't do that. But we're now 9 weeks into the season and trends are trends, right? Trends are trends. And they have enough talent, I think, but the talent hasn't been producing. It hasn't been producing. So when that happens, usually what you can do during this period is go and address your need. And while Baltimore added a corner for depth purposes, they added a wide receiver for depth purposes. They were never going to get a Max Crosby this, Max Crosby that, right? It was never going to happen. Never going to get a Myles Garrett this, Myles Garrett that. I would be shocked if the Ravens pass rush doesn't improve over the course of the rest of the season. I just think that guys have to step up. I think Travis Jones coming back will also help whenever that is. But at this point, when is Travis Jones going to be healthy? And can the Ravens start momentum here? They can get back on track. I'm not sitting here and telling you that, the Ravens, their pass rush is never going to sack the quarterback again, and the quarterback's always going to have 5 seconds to throw. I'm sure we're going to see some level of improvement, but what is that level of improvement? What is that? It's more of a risk to not go out there and get somebody than it is to add another piece. And of course, you have to do some roster maneuvering, roster shuffling, but you're essentially, and you can either feel good or bad about this. You either have Kyle Van Noy step up to the plate a little more, which again, I'm not trying to rag on Kyle. He's been good this season for the most part. You have to have Odafe Oweh step up in a big way. You have to have other guys step up as well. It depends. I mean, let's do this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in the guys currently on this roster stepping up? Scale of 1 to 10. 1 being there's no hope, you don't believe it at all, or 10, do you think that, they're coming back with a vengeance on Thursday and they're going to be the best pass rush in the league? Is that what it's going to be? So already off the bat, I'm seeing 1, 3, 4, 3, a couple of 6s in there, a couple of 5s. We got 7s, 1s. We got some confident people. We got some not so confident people. That's kind of what I was expecting, because at the end of the day, like Odafe Oweh, they picked up the 5th-year option, right? So he has 1 more year, but this was kind of a make or break thing of like, who is he as a player? They're giving him kind of the keys here next to Kyle Van Noy, and it's been disappointing. Now, he's gotten held on some plays, this, that, and the other, but I can't sit here and make excuses, and I also can't sit here and say, that the Ravens are done because they didn't make a pass rushing move. I think overall it hurts them more than acquiring somebody would have, but Alex here seems like they're relying on their offense. I think they're relying on the fact that their offense is so good, and they're relying on the fact that hopefully guys can step up and turn it around. But we will see. He's got a couple of big AFC North matchups coming up, and you got to have a lot of other things as well. And Sedarian, I know there are a lot of opinions on Justin Madubuike too. I get it. I didn't expect Madubuike to come in and have the year he had. He was obviously going to be in defensive teams' game plans. I know it's been disappointing because the numbers and the stats haven't been there for him. But when he gets double teamed, other guys have to win. And again, like if Madubuike wants to be considered one of the best pass rushers in the league, you also got to beat double teams. So that is what it is there. But I want to bring up Sedarian's point here. Pass rushers do cost money. Both the trades they got for the vet men, and on top of that, the Panthers are paying a lot of Deontay Johnson's salary. But I would have been hard-pressed to think that maybe a team that the Ravens were going to trade with would have eaten some of that money. And maybe the parameters were teams weren't going to eat money unless the Ravens gave up a higher draft pick. That's totally reasonable. And then the Ravens maybe said, okay, we don't really want to do that. But, man, I just think overall, based off of this offense, based off of expectations and the clear need that the Ravens had, it certainly, in my opinion, is disappointing. Doesn't mean the Ravens can't win the Super Bowl this year. Doesn't mean they can't. But I think you would have increased your chances had you added a pass rusher to the fold. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about the Trey White move. Again, the Ravens make a move for Tre'Davious White from the Los Angeles Rams. So stay tuned. We got a lot to dive into on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens, coming at you on the Tuesday, just about 30 minutes after the trade deadline passes. First, this show is brought to you by Game Time. I love the hype and the atmosphere of watching basketball live. You got celebrity sightings, the sound from the court and the field, the crowd. And for me, I'm a big Denver Nuggets guy. I don't know who anybody else's teams are, but for me, being a Nuggets guy, when they're in the DC area, love trying to go to those games. Looking forward to doing that. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Plus, Game Time has tickets for all events. You got concerts, shows, and more, not just sports. So this Ravens and Bengals game coming up, huge game on Thursday. Be sure to check out the deals and the tiers you get on Game Time Picks. They got super deals and other tiers of deals too. Plus, the app has Game Time Picks, seat views, lowest price guarantee, Game Time ticket coverage, and so much more. Hit the guesswork of buying tickets with Game Time Picks down the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Get create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDON. Spell LOCKED1 for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. And this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, your live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You're started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Allstriker still here with you on this deadline edition of the show. Appreciate everybody who is here today making Locked On Ravens either your first listen of the day or your second listen if you tuned in to the episode we had yesterday with former Ravens receiver, Super Bowl champion Qadry Ismail. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. We bring you 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage, plus more. We go live after every Ravens game. We have bonus episodes. We have everything Ravens related here on Locked On Ravens. Tell a friend, tell a family member. Obviously, promote the shows on social media, but also word of mouth, still a very effective form of spreading the word. So appreciate everybody in the video and audio communities. Trey White, let's talk about it. I want to start off here by saying that I'm not taking the whole doom and gloom approach of, okay, the Ravens are done. They're not winning the Super Bowl. There's no way that anybody can turn it around. There's no way that the Ravens can't do this, can't do that. But I'm also going to be real about it and say that I was underwhelmed. I was underwhelmed with the deadline. I was. And I get that the Ravens have cap situations. Draft picks are important. I get it. I understand 100%. But you can't look me in the face and say the Ravens have had even a decent pass rush over the last month plus after what we saw early in the season and after we have seen both Jameis Winston and Bo Nix have multiple different times where they just have 5 seconds to throw the ball. Now, Trey White comes in. Obviously, he's a 2-time Pro Bowler from the Buffalo Bills. They get him from the Los Angeles Rams. Trey White has had a bit of a injury history recently. It's been really unfortunate to see that for him. He's a really good dude, first and foremost. Like, he's one of the better people in the NFL. And, anybody you ask, they'll tell you that about Trey White. He's a good guy to root for. In terms of the play, it hasn't been great. It hasn't been great. So when you look at Trey White, I'll just pull up a couple of initial stats here for him. First of all, he's been a healthy scratch, I think, over the last 3 weeks for the Rams. So the Rams certainly looking to move off of him. Not a shock that he was traded, and honestly, not a shock that he went for, honestly, what he did. It was a 2026 Ravens 7th round pick for a 2027 Rams 7th round pick, and Trey White obviously coming back as well. Trey White apparently ranks 175 out of 200 corners in coverage per PFF. And you look at how, I know that there's been a lot of people about, okay, you can rejuvenate him and this, that, and the other. The Rams play a different system, different scheme. Partially true. But when you look at, and Cole Jackson, shout out to him for pulling up this graphic here. This comes from fball_insights. In terms of the Ravens and the Rams coverage schemes and systems, they actually run a decently similar type, both man and zone. They play Rams 3%. And Ravens 4% on cover 0 in man. You got 20%, 24% Rams Ravens in cover 1. 0%, 1% in cover 2 in man. Then you look at the zone numbers. The Ravens run a bit less zone here in cover 2 than the Rams in zone, 10% compared to 8%, 37% compared to 33%. Ravens, Rams cover 3 in zone, cover 4 in zone. You got 10% Rams, 15% Ravens, and cover 6 in zone. You got 16% Rams, 12% Ravens. So that's not that much of, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, in terms of like, oh, well, I know a lot of people are comparing this to the Marcus Peters move. And yes, the Rams weren't using Marcus Peters effectively. And for the Rams, they probably weren't using Tre'Davious White in the effective way, the most effective way. And maybe the Ravens can get on that. But the numbers also don't lie on Trey White. It's a down season for him. There was some level of, potential adjustment that he can make, and maybe he can rejuvenate. We've seen the Ravens do that with countless veterans, so I'm not counting that out, but I'm just saying I'm not super hopeful about it. I'm not super hopeful about it. If he comes in and proves me wrong, hey, I'm all for it. I want that to happen. I do. I truly am rooting for Tre'Davious White, but I have to be real about how I feel about it, and I don't love it. I don't love it. I see people talking about he's going to take Brandon Stevens reps. I don't believe that. I think this is a depth move for the Ravens more so than it is an quote unquote upgrade over Brandon Stevens. What they could also try to do is maybe they want to experiment with him at safety. Maybe that's what they want to do, and they want to see how he can play there. The Ravens, obviously, I think safety was more of a need for the Ravens than the corner position was. But to me, it felt underwhelming. Like I think that out of all the positions, the Ravens didn't necessarily need to go get a corner. Of course, getting a corner helps in some way, shape, or form. It's essentially free depth, and you're never going to turn down free depth. But I'm not going to come in with the expectation that Trey White is going to go and just supplant Brandon Stevens or take away from Nate Wiggins. I think Trey White is the fourth corner on this team. I think he slots in where Jalen Armour-Davis was getting his reps, and I think that is where he is. So essentially, you trade for a number 3 wide receiver and a number 4 corner. And I think that you feel better about your corner depth. You feel better about your wide receiver depth. And you take the chance, I think, on a guy that has proven it. But who is Trey White compared to who he was then in Buffalo before the injuries? And I think that in a reduced type of role, you can manage the snaps a little bit, don't have to push him too hard. I think that is fine. But I just think it's the expectation of, oh, hey, you still have Marlon, Brandon, and Nate, plus Millette and a bunch of other guys that can play there. I get it's been underwhelming secondary-wise. I'm not trying to come in and say that. But this is kind of what I'm thinking in world class. This is kind of where my mind is at. I feel like maybe this could be they're going to try to experiment with him at safety. I think that's what they might try to do here. Obviously, Eddie Jackson's been a disappointment, right? If they are moving him to safety, I like it more. If they are moving him to safety, I like it more. Because I think that can be a possible role for him. I think Trey White could actually kind of excel there. But if it's just a depth corner, he's going to take away snaps from Nate or Brandon Stevens or whatever it is, I don't like the move as much. So I'm curious to see how they use them. I won't make any rash assumptions or grades about it until we kind of see how he's utilized. But if they want to use him as a corner safety hybrid or just a full safety in general, I like that move a lot more than I do if he's just coming in to be a depth cornerback. So if you're replacing Eddie Jackson with Trey, okay. Like I'm cool with that. Still doesn't necessarily make up for the fact they didn't get an edge rusher, but I still think that is what it is. And I see in the chat, a lot of people also kind of echo that statement. So I know a lot of people have talked about it. World class. Yours was the first one I saw. Appreciate you bringing that up. So yeah, I think to me, Trey White, it's not a needle mover move, and the Ravens were never going to go after the true needle mover players. Obviously, I mentioned guys like Myles Garrett or Max Crosby. Now, the rumblings were that the Ravens were actually in on a needle mover in Marshawn Lattimore. And then after that, Trey White was the corner move they obviously made. Now, Marshawn Lattimore would have taken Brandon Stevens snaps. That's a guy that would have taken Brandon Stevens snaps. The salary was super low. It made a lot of sense from that perspective. But you look at the actual package of compensation that the Commanders got, or the Saints got, for Marshawn Lattimore was a 3rd-round pick, a 4th-round pick, and a 6th-round pick. The Saints got their own 6th-round pick back and it was Marshawn Lattimore Marshawn Lattimore and a 5th round pick. So 3, 4, 6 for Lattimore and 5. I think once that was the asking price, the Ravens probably were out. I think they value those mid-round picks a ton. And unless they know that the guy's going to be an instant fit, and I think that Marshawn Lattimore would have been, but to me, I would have loved Marshawn in Baltimore, but I just think that asking price, people kind of, the Ravens, they should have given that up. The Ravens were never going to give that up. They just were never going to give that up. So to me, I think that Lattimore was a nice, it was cool. The Ravens were sniffing around, but I think once that asking price got to what it was, and the Commanders have a boatload of draft picks that they can throw at guys, and they're going for it. So shout out to them. But I think if anything, that's what makes it frustrating for a lot of people, right? Is the fact that, the Ravens offense is so historic. You see teams, the Ravens rivals, getting better with, it's not like DeAndre Hopkins is not the reason the Chiefs won a Super Bowl. Amari Cooper is not the reason the Bills won a Super Bowl, but those are pretty decent upgrades. And I think that Deontay Johnson is an upgrade over Nelson Aguilar. I think that Trey White is an upgrade over Jalen Armour-Davis or Eddie Jackson, depending on where that goes. But they're not the pure needle movers. I think those are more just depth moves. And Paul, good point. I love this point. They have a rookie quarterback contract too. It's the type of moves that you should be making when you have a rookie quarterback. And while Marshawn Lattimore's salary is not huge, I think he's only owed like $1 million, maybe even less than that, maybe a little more. Still, you make moves like this when you have rookie quarterback contracts. Now they have the ability to go and re-sign Marshawn Lattimore. So for both Trey White and Deontay Johnson, it's kind of a disappointing haul. You get better depth-wise, but how much of an improvement is it, essentially, is what it is. So I'm glad we kind of talked out the Trey White move, because I think a move to safety would be a lot better just in terms of what the Ravens can offer in a role, because they need a safety more than a corner. And for Deontay Johnson, obviously didn't play a lot in that Denver game, but we will see how that works out. Coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk more about the general Ravens trade deadline, talk about where they go from here, assess where they are as a team right now, and maybe the Ravens making a signing or two. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on this episode of Locked On Ravens Live. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And for me, I want to take a moment to say thank you to my brothers there. Both of them have really helped me throughout the course of my life, supported me, and I really wouldn't be here and doing what I'm doing without them and everything that they have given me over the course of my life. And this month, it's all about gratitude. And along with the person and the people that I just shouted out, there's another person we don't get to thank enough. That's ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we're trying our best to make sense of everything. And in this crazy world, that isn't easy. Here's a reminder to send some thanks to people in your life, including yourself. And if you benefited from therapy, look, you know there are plenty of benefits, whether it's learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It can empower you to become the best version of yourself. And it isn't just for those who experience major trauma. It's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back, Locked On Ravens, final segment. Kevin Oestreicher talking with you now about 45 minutes after the trade deadline has passed. Baltimore acquires Deontay Johnson earlier, and now it is Trey White who comes in to the fold. Again, it's disappointing based off expectations, but again, depending on your expectations, maybe you're not as disappointed. You kind of expected this to happen. Here on Locked On Ravens, though, we're a 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast. Just want to remind everybody here that we bring you Ravens coverage 5 days per week. So whether you're an everyday or you listen every single day, thank you so much for tuning in every single day and for your support. If you're new to the show, new to the channel, welcome in. Hopefully you stay a while. And if you're somewhere in the middle, thank you for tuning in. Now for the Ravens, let's just off the bat talk about grades. So I mentioned, I'll read the trade haul again. The Ravens coming in, Deontay Johnson, Tre'Davious White, 6th round pick, 7th round pick. Going out, it's a 5th round pick and a 7th round pick. A through F grading system. Put your grades down in the chat if you're live with us, in the comments if you're watching after the fact, or if you're in audio form, be sure to message me on Twitter your grade, or just put it in the comments of one of my tweets. What is your grade for the Ravens trade deadline? A, B, C, D, F. You can put an E if you want to put between D and F. I'll accept that even though it's not a real grade. It's difficult because I think you have to factor in your expectations. You have to factor in where this team was versus where they are now. You have to factor in some of the other needs that this Ravens team had. And you have to also look at the trades both from their own separate entities, like they're their own separate thing. And you also have to look at them from the Ravens and their needs and were they able to get what they needed. I don't think the Ravens did enough this trade deadline. Obviously, there is a shot guys on the roster can get going. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not. There is a shot. There is actually a decent shot that it happens. But I think they could have increased that chance if they were to add somebody, especially in the pass rushing department. So I see a lot of C's, C minuses. We got B minuses. We got some Z minuses. So yeah, that people who are putting Z minus might not be feeling super confident. We got F's. We got D's. I don't think I've seen an A. Yeah, I don't think I've seen an A. So I'm gonna go C minus. I'm gonna go C minus. Wasn't a complete failure, but it was a disappointment. That's what I'll say. Wasn't a complete failure, but it was a disappointment. Because I think the Ravens did get better depth-wise, but that depth was your number 3 wide receiver and number 4 corner. So to me, I think that yes, you did get better for the Ravens, but your top need was not addressed. Now we could be sitting here in a week. We could be sitting here in 2 weeks, and the Ravens make some level of a signing, right? They make some level of a signing. That makes it okay. Sure. Maybe they get Calais Campbell if he's released by Miami. Maybe they sign a veteran D tackle or edge rusher that can help them in the moment. Maybe that is it. But as we are sitting here today on Tuesday, November 5th, 4:50 p.m. Eastern time, I just don't believe they did enough. And that's why I'm calling it a disappointment. And I know I sat up here for 2 weeks, multiple weeks, saying that if the Ravens didn't get a pass rusher, it would have been a disappointment. You know, if the Ravens didn't do this, it would have been a disappointment. And that happened. And I'm not going to go back on that. So I say that it is a disappointment for me. And now you got to rely on your guys. You know, I know everybody gets mad at the phrase, but the Ravens are a we like our guys type team. That is what it is. The Ravens are a we like our guys type team. They send messages to their guys that they believe in them. And I think the thing that this did is it sent a message to Odafe Owe, sent a message to Kyle Van Noy, sent a message to all those interior guys that, hey, we believe in you. Now, is that the right move? Time will tell. Time will tell. I wish they would have done something, but here we are and they haven't. But at the end of the day, this Ravens team is taking a risk by kind of doubling down on what they had. We have seen that work out for the Ravens plenty of times. We have seen it fail for them multiple times. That is what it is. So I think that there is definitely a shot that guys can turn it around. There's a shot. You know, Odafe Owe has more than what we've seen. Kyle Van Noy, we saw it early in the season. I think he can get back to that. But how realistic is it? I think Travis Jones solves a lot of problems. I think Travis Jones solves a ton of problems. But when is he going to be healthy? When is he going to be healthy? That's the thing. Maybe they feel better about his ankle injury and he'll be able to play a bit this week. But when he played a couple weeks ago, he couldn't push off at all. And he wasn't really making an impact. In fact, he was a liability. So, you know, that is what it is. But I also want to bring up a comment because I do want to I want to talk about both sides of this here. Emil's saying from a business standpoint, it's an A. EDC got better of both financially. From a business standpoint, I think it was fine. You know, you get Deontay Johnson for in a 6th for a 5th, and Carolina pays almost all the salary. And if Deontay leaves, you get a comp pick. And then for Trey White, you know, it's a 7 for a 7. You get free corner depth. That I think was fine. But I just think it's with what they had and what they needed and what we have seen both from the eye test, from the numbers, and this, that, and the other. When you talk about pass defense, I think a lot of people end up talking about, you know, oh, it's all the secondary, right? Pass defense, oh, who's covering? But in reality, it's both the pass rush and the secondary. That's what it is. So we'll see. But again, there are so many other factors that include a bunch of different things. So in my opinion, I think that, yes, it would have been great if the Ravens got a pass rusher. I was certainly on that train. But I think depth-wise, they upgraded number 3 wide receiver, number 4 corner. But is that enough to push them to where they need to go? Is that enough to maybe go through some more pains with all of that? We're going to find out. So as we stand right now, it's kind of like, okay, they didn't get a pass rusher. They only got a wide receiver and a corner. But do we see someone else added over the next couple of days, couple of weeks? We will see what goes on with that. And hey, we got a goat in the chat here. Sip the tally, man. Appreciate you tuning in. If you need more Ravens content, this is one of the guys. He knows his stuff. Be sure to tap into Sip the Tally Films, man. I've had a lot of respect for him, so appreciate you tuning in, man. Appreciate the support, and be sure to go support him over there. One of the YouTube originals. So appreciate that. So I think rounding out kind of my thoughts on the whole situation, for me, I'm going to give it a C-. I've already been very clear in that. We'll see over the next couple of days if there's another chapter to be written in this whole situation. But not getting a pass rusher certainly hurts at this point. Because can you get enough from the guys on your roster? And as we talked about at the beginning of the show, David Ojabo, apparently he's not in the Ravens' plans. We'll see. We don't know what's going on with him, but it's been a healthy scratch the last 2 weeks. That's what it is. And do you have enough confidence in Yannick Ngakoue? Do you have enough confidence in Tavius Robinson continuing to take a leap? Is that what it is? And yeah, I mean, this is kind of where I am too, Sip the Tally. I mean, you're talking about it. It's like you're trying to process it all. And like what did they do? Well, they got a wide receiver and they got a corner. They didn't get a pass rusher. They needed a pass rusher. They didn't get one. But I think over the next couple of days, we're going to see if there's a guy that moves the needle enough. And here's the other thing I'll say about that, by the way. And Swaggy, you're right. Still some pass rushers could get released. But here's what I'll say. Don't just get a guy to get a guy. Don't just get a guy to get a guy. We talk about that with trades all the time, right? Where it's like if you just get a guy and bring him in for no reason and he doesn't move a needle or he doesn't, do anything for you, you're taking away snaps from somebody else. You're taking away a roster spot from somebody else. You have to make sure that move is worth it and that move is better than somebody on your team. So for Deontay Johnson, yeah, he's a better depth option than Nelson Aguilar, Tez Walker, Tyler Wallace, those guys. For Trey White, if you move him to safety, he's a better option than Eddie Jackson and some of those other guys they have. So that's fine. But as a pass rusher, if you bring in some guy who can't play and you're taking away snaps from somebody else, that to me is not the way to do it. You made the decision to not get a guy. If Calais Campbell becomes available, let's go. I'm with it. But you have to make a move that actually benefits you. And it doesn't have to be a needle-moving move that, you win the Super Bowl or lose it because of that. But at the same time, you also can't just bring somebody in to do it. So that is what it is. Paul asking, what pass rusher should we have traded for? The names that apparently were available is Azeez Ojulari, who's apparently the price was too high and the Giants kept him. Calais Campbell, Jadeveon Clowney, Arden Key. Those are all possible options that could have been. But the Ravens did not do it. Baron Browning got traded to the Cardinals, and Zadarius Smith got traded to the Lions. And Khalil Davis got traded from Houston on the interior to San Francisco. So we will see. And yeah, we actually moving them to safety. The chat we talked about it in the second part of the show. I said as a corner, I'm not necessarily sure I love the move. In fact, I don't necessarily love it, even though it's free, essentially. But as a safety, I think that Trey White could make a good safety. So we will see. But the Ravens, again, do not get a pass rusher. They decide to stick with their guys there. They get Trey White from the Los Angeles Rams, and their final haul is Deontay Johnson and Tre'Davious White. That's all I have for you here today, though, on this instant reaction live edition of Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate everybody for doing so. On the way out, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. Follow along in audio form. Subscribe over there as well for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be talking more about the trade deadline, getting into a little bit more reaction from it and what the word is out there, both from the organization and across the league about what the Ravens did. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.